Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate chamber. Sound. Senate chamber. Sound.
Open session. So I'm just waiting for confirmation from broadcasting that the meeting is now in open session. So just bear with me.
Okay.
Ready to go?
Ready to go.
Thank you. So we've got that confirmation now, and the meeting is in open session and has been broadcast. Can I inform those in the public gallery that they can use mobile devices through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available on the gallery rules for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi network. 3G and 4G should not be used, and no recording or photographs are to be taken of the meeting. If members are content, I will proceed then through the agenda. Everyone content? So apologies, Clerk?
No apologies. I think John is due to join us remotely in the next couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you. So the next item of business, declaration of members' interests. Just remind you all that you're obliged to declare any relevant finance or other interests before taking part in relevant committee proceedings. So does any member have any interest to declare?
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that I'm a member of the Public Accounts Committee and the Finance Committee, so I've discussed some of these items in other committees also. Okay,
thank you for that. That'll be duly noted. So move then to the draft minutes of our meeting held on the 16th of October 1924. So I can just refer you to the draft minutes of the meeting held then, which are on page 6 of the meeting pack. Are members content with the draft minutes? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. I'll duly sign those. I'll borrow the clerk's pen. Thank you. That's the minutes signed as a true record. Any matters arising from the minutes? Good morning, John. Can you hear us okay? I think you're maybe muted, John.
Broadcasting should unmute him.
Yep.
In a second.
Chair, yeah, good morning, and I can hear everything okay, thank you, yeah.
Thank you, John, and welcome to the meeting. So move then to item 5, the C and AG salary arrangements. Refer you to the Committee Secretariat paper at page 13 and the research briefing paper on page 15 of the meeting pack, and remind you that it was agreed at the meeting on the 5th of June to commission research to provide a comparative analysis of the arrangements for determining the C&AG salary in other UK jurisdictions, with a focus on who actually determines the salary, whether any benchmarking applies, including whether salaries are tied to a particular role, and details of the salary for C&AGs in all UK jurisdictions. So at this point, I'll invite Nick to brief the committee.
Thanks, Chair. Our researcher, Ray, is unavailable at the meeting today. He would normally go through the research paper, but I'll do that at you. So just to remind members, this is a legacy issue that was identified by the previous committee, and indeed in its legacy report the previous committee suggested that this committee actually hold a review on this particular topic. So just to give you the current state of affairs and the current conventions, and this, if you just follow through page 15, which is where the research briefing is. The current convention here in the Assembly is in 2008. The then Audit Committee assumed responsibility from the then Department of Finance and Personnel in relation to tabling motions on the Comptroller and Auditor General's salary. The salary for the C&AG in Northern Ireland is linked to a published pay grade for judges at salary group 5, and this was recommended again in 2008 by the Senior Salaries Review Body at that point. The then Audit Committee reviewed this position again and concluded that the link to Salary Group 5 was fair and transparent, and this has remained the position to date. So looking at the other UK jurisdictions, to give members a bit of background of how things work elsewhere, in England, the Comptroller and Auditor General is the head of the National Audit Office. The post is an office of the House of Commons and is therefore independent of government. The CNAG in England is appointed by the monarch and has a term of 10 years, and the incumbent in the role was appointed in 2019, so is just over halfway through their term. The salary for the CNAG in England is determined jointly by the Prime Minister and also the chair of the Committee on Public Accounts, the equivalent of our PAC. In 2007, a review commissioned by the Public Accounts Commission noted that the salary of the CNAG in England is pegged to that of a High Court judge. However, in 2011, legislation was introduced in Westminster, the Budget Responsibility and National Audit Act, that severed the link between CNAG salary and High Court judges. So currently, the pay salary for the CNAG in England is not linked to any public pay scale. If we move on to Scotland, the Auditor General in Scotland, again, is appointed by the Crown on the recommendation of the Scottish Parliament. The salary is determined by the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body. That's the equivalent to the Assembly Commission here, and is paid by Audit Scotland, which is the equivalent of the NI Audit Office here. The salary, again, is not linked to any public pay scales. However, any uplift in the salary is linked to awards made to the pay scales for the Scottish parliamentary bodies. So it would be the equivalent of pay awards to the Secretariat here. That is reflected in the salary of the Auditor General in Scotland. Moving on to Wales. The Auditor General for Wales is again appointed by the Crown, and that's following nomination and approval in the then National Assembly for Wales, now of course the Welsh Senate. Salary is determined by the Senate itself, and following the appointment of the current AG in Wales in 2019, the Finance Committee in Wales addressed the issue of salary. Salary in Wales is adjusted in line with arrangements for the bottom of the Permanent Secretary's pay band in the Welsh Civil Service. The committee reviewed this arrangement again in 2021, and it has recommended that in future the salary for the Auditor General in Wales should not be linked to any pay scales of an external body. However, to date, that recommendation is yet to be actioned. So that gives you a brief overview of how things work in the other jurisdictions of the UK, and as a reminder, just in terms of how things operate here, it is for the Audit Committee to determine what they wish to do with the salary of the Controller and Auditor General. It is linked to Salary Group 5 for judges. The Audit Committee, if it chose to change the salary, would bring a motion to the Chamber, and then that would be looked at and potentially agreed by the Assembly in full. In terms of current salary for the Controller and Auditor General here, the salary hasn't received any uplift since 2021, and that was the last time in which it was reviewed by the then Audit Committee. Obviously, there hasn't been an Audit Committee in 22-23 until the beginning of 24, and this is our first opportunity to look at that. I would say that given that in a couple of months, that is then 4 years since the last time the committee reviewed it. If the committee decided to review the arrangements in more detail, it might be worth at the same time the committee also considering the current salary that is attributed to the CNAG. So, Chair, that's where we are at the minute with that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, members, we would like to have comments, some feedback from you on whether you wish to hold a more thorough review of the options for determining mechanisms and level of the Controller and Audit General's salary in the future, perhaps including requesting legal advice on the options open to the committee. And also I'd like maybe some feedback and comments from you on whether you would wish to consider the CNAG's current salary, which has not, as Nick has told us, received any uplift since 2021. So I'm open to comments from the floor. Yes, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. The research is quite comprehensive. I just want to put on record thanks for the detail. It's very, very helpful. I think when you look across the board, the level that's set for Northern Ireland is broadly in line, with the similar devolved nations. But I'd be happy to consider, since it's set in legislation, maybe legal advice or further review on that. And I just wanted to ask for clarity. When you say it's received no uplift since 2021, is there no inflation or incremental levels?
If I may, no. The salary is purely determined by the committee and then the Assembly. There isn't. So the pay scale on which it's based has moved in the last 3 years, but the C&AG salary hasn't, because it's determined by this committee and the Assembly.
Nothing to do with me.
Any distracting noise in the background.
Okay, thanks. Nick, you were next.
Yeah, I mean, I would be open to a review of the mechanisms for determining salary. I think the judicial pay scale seems slightly out of step with other jurisdictions, so I think it would be worth the committee receiving further advice on that, on instituting a review. And I think, given the time that has elapsed since there's been any uplift, I would concur that it would be appropriate for the committee to look at that again at this stage.
I'd just confirm with the clerk that any decision that would be taken going forward in relation to the salary level, it would be backdated to the last review.
That is certainly the convention. Again, obviously, it is the committee that would decide that, but in the past, that has been the convention. Perhaps Ciara and John.
John, did you want to come in? Sorry, Ciara, you've indicated you would come in. Ciara, please.
Yes. No, I would concur with maybe having a separate, more detailed meeting with legal advice. I think it would be useful as well if we could get the context in which it was originally set alongside the judiciary grade 5. That would be really, really useful. And then likewise too, I do believe in relation to it should be linked in some way rather than discretionary. That would be just my initial thoughts on it. But no, I would welcome a more detailed review. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Ciara. John, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to say that I agree with the points that have been raised about having a further look at this, and also the additional point raised there by Ciara. No issue at all with that we should look at the context, or at least be aware of the context of how this mechanism was established, or the pay rate was established originally.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a consensus of the committee then, would be that we would request a more detailed briefing paper, including a draft terms of reference for a review on both issues, and this will be brought to a future meeting for consideration. Clerk, do you want to comment on that?
That's fine. I've made a note of the points made, and we'll endeavour to bring that to our meeting in January.
Okay, thank you very much for that, members. Move to the next item on the agenda, number 6, codification of the budget process, and just refer members to the Secretariat paper on page 23 of the meeting pack. And Nick, if I could just invite you to brief the committee on the issue.
Thanks, Chair. As Chair said, page 23 of the meeting pack, a short but sweet Secretariat paper. This again is a legacy issue, and is something that the previous committee included in its legacy report that this committee should take some time to have a look at if it decides to. Currently, the Audit Committee's role in agreeing the estimates for the Northern Ireland Audit Office and the Northern Ireland Public Service Ombudsman, and then laying them before the Assembly, is codified both in legislation and in standing orders. However, as I say, the previous committee, the 2017 to 2022 committee, intended to codify its role in relation to the scrutiny of the draft budgets for the NIAO, for NIPSO and for the Assembly Commission. This is obviously what the committee has been doing at its last meeting and will continue to do it today. This is separate from laying the estimates, which happens further down the budgetary cycle. The 2017 to 22 committee suggested that this should be by way of amendment to Assembly standing orders. And if I just refer members to Annex A, which is at the next page, it just gives you the standing order that is there now. Sorry, let me see. It's in Annex B, apologies, Standing Order 58. And that's where the codification is as to that it would be the Audit Committee that brings the motion to the Assembly in terms of the estimates for NIAO and NIPSO. So, therefore, the committee may wish to, again, commission research papers and perhaps also legal advice on potential amendments to standing orders, as well as an options paper to look at the way in which it could could codify the scrutiny of the draft budgets of the Audit Office, the Public Service Ombudsman and the Assembly Commission. Currently, the committee has memorandums of understanding with the Audit Office and with the Public Service Ombudsman that gives a framework of how the process should take place. It doesn't have that with the Assembly Commission. There is an agreement between the committee and the Commission, but there isn't anything codified or contained within standing orders. It was the feeling of the previous committee that that's something that really should happen, and so therefore we'll be asking the committee to potentially look at that in the future, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, any comments? What you've heard? Okay, so can I have agreement from you to commission research papers and legal advice on the relevant budget scrutiny process in neighbouring jurisdictions, including their legislative and procedural underpinnings, which will inform the committee on its options to codify the process? Are we agreed? Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, agreed.
Move then to item number 7. Northern Ireland Audit Office draft budget for 25-26. Can I refer members to the budget submission by the NIAO at page 28 in your pack, the NIAO budget letter at page 35, correspondence from the PAC at page 37, and correspondence from the NIAO on the October monitoring round at page 39. And can I remind members that at its last meeting, the committee agreed to ask officials from the NIAO to be available at this meeting to answer any further questions on their budget submission. So if you have any questions, please indicate to the clerk. And so just like at this stage, to welcome Adrina Carville, the Controller and Audit General, Rodney Allen, Chief Operating Officer, and Brian O'Neill, Corporate Service Director. And could I ask them if they would like to make any opening comments or if they're happy to move straight to questions?
Happy to move straight to questions, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I maybe ask a couple of questions. First, can you provide more detail on the reasons for the difficulties in recruiting qualified members of staff in the current financial year?
Yes, Chair. I'll open the discussion on that. Thank you. If it's okay, Chair, I'll give a wee bit of context. I've been thinking about this since we were last with you 4 weeks ago. So I asked the team to look back a little bit, give us a bit of research. So as we've explained to the committee in your question pointedly, the pressure is mostly on the financial auditor space, those people that we would like to bring into the organisation who are qualified accountants. So when we looked back over the last 6 years, I'm pleased to report that we have been somewhat incrementally increasing the numbers, but we've actually moved by 20% over those 6 years. So I suppose simplistically we're getting there, but it is taking us time. So that brings us to the in-year situation. So we have ran this year alone, since April, 10 recruitment competitions for a range of posts and a range of opportunities. But even our most recent financial auditor opportunity, the applicant numbers were again fairly restricted. However, we have 2 appointees joining us now, one this month and one next month. So we are getting a little bit of traction. Colleagues in other regions are indicating that the market is changing for them. So we're hoping to start getting a bounce from that as well, I have to say, because we still have vacancies in that space. So the market is exceptionally competitive, to be frank, and has been for a number of years. However, we have been making gains, and we are getting there, but we're not up to the level that this committee has supported us for, and that's the challenge for us, and that has led, Chair, to in-year underspends.
Thank you. Have you considered any other means by which you could raise further revenues in the future?
Revenues, yes, yep. Yes, Chair. I'll take that in the first instance. So we're in a situation we bring in income just short of £3 million, and most of our income is from hard charged audits. So the situation, again, members would probably know this, but just by way of context, a proportion of audits are hard charged. Most are notionally charged, and that's set out in the legislation, quite old legislation now, 1987 audit order, which provides that the CNAG may charge, but also provides circumstances where the CNAG cannot charge. So, for instance, central government departments, we cannot levy a hard charged fee. So we're somewhat restricted in the amount of income that we can raise. Within that 2.9, 2.7 as it will be next year, it breaks down to roughly about 2.7 million in central government, and the balance just over £1 million from local government. So we hard charge all of our work in the local government sector. That does create some difficulties with our clients, those that are actually having to write a cheque or make a bank transfer or pay us relative to those who note it for notional purposes. Now, of course, to be absolutely honest, we're as efficient with every single audit as we can be, regardless of whether it's hard charged or notionally charged. So the scope is somewhat limited. The previous committee in its legacy report did encourage us to take a fresh look at the extent that we could and should hard charge. So we did prepare a fairly extensive paper. Brian and his team drafted that up, which we brought through our own governance, through the senior leadership team and into our own board, setting out the current position. If we were to charge more, we would need legislative change, and if that is something that the committee would like us to look at, we'd be happy to bring something forward. However, I must emphasise the point, and I think I said this to the committee a few weeks back, in many respects it's public money going around in a circle, and I have to say there is another train or school of thought that arguably would say if you funded us gross, then we would notionally charge everybody to no detriment to the public purse. It would be a balance in finances. So we are certainly looking at it. Separate to that, I think I did say to the committee previously, you will recall our building. So we have our tenanted space, which we're working very hard to have tenants in all of the floors to maximise the return that we can get on that investment. And also we are providing, at the moment, free use of the training facilities to the wider public sector, so we are generating an efficiency for the wider public sector. But again, we could hard charge for that if the committee wanted us to consider that. It is the thin end of the wedge, but nonetheless it would be an income stream.
Thank you for that. Invite the Vice Chair now to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming here today. The work that you do is so important. It's the scrutiny of public sector spending, and this Assembly really needs the work of the Audit Office to be there and continue at this high standard to assist us in our scrutiny work. So for this going into 25-26, it's a 7% increase, just so that looks high in the overall setting of the Northern Ireland finances compared to other things. So I just wanted to ask, so in terms of this year, 24-25, you had indicated, I'd asked before, that you're going to be underspent on this year's budget, yet you have been able to function and not miss any deadlines. The accounts have been audited. You have been able to service the commitments to this Assembly. So I just wanted to ask, in terms of, if you were operating at this level this year, why do we need so much more for next year?
I maybe initially respond on the underspend and hand over to Tarina. Thank you, Diane. So in terms of 24-25, I think when I last came to the committee, I had explained that October monitoring round had just commenced. We have surrendered £629,000 of our budget as part of that monitoring return. And we did say at an early stage last year that we would be prudent in our handling of any of the finances that we receive, and we would, of course, surrender to the consolidated fund for the wider use across public services at the earliest opportunity. So we have done that, and the reasons for that surrender are predominantly the earlier part of the conversation around staff vacancies. However, part of that too, Diane, it's interesting your comments around servicing the committees, because last year the committee, your committee, gave us additional funding to really improve what we do with the committees, and Trina will maybe speak about this in a second. To be frank, we've only scratched the surface on that. So you gave us in the region of £500,000 extra for this year on audit quality and servicing other committees. We've used very, very little of that money, so we've ended up handing most of it back because we can't get the staffing up to the level that we really would like. So for instance, I will shut up in a second. So for instance, we had a report out yesterday in education. Unsurprisingly, we think the committee would be very keen for that, primacy with PAC first, but if indeed PAC was not considering that particular subject, my suspicion is that the Education Committee would probably be very keen to hold some degree of inquiry on it. Sorry for being so presumptuous, it's a very topical issue. That being the case, of course, we need to stand ready to have a team to come and work with the Education Committee. I just use that as an example because it's very recent. Terina.
Yeah, and I suppose just so, I think I outlined to the committee the last time we were in front of you, approximately 70% of our staff resource that we currently had is occupied on our financial audit work. That is a statutory responsibility, and quite a lot of the deadlines for that work are again defined in statute, and what that means is we have certain pressure points in the year, the biggest one being pre-assembly summer recess. We actually have missed some deadlines in the last 2 years, which it's really unfortunate, because we simply haven't had the staff complement to fulfil all of that work at the time. So we did have to, in the last 2 years, write to departments and say we do not have the staff complement to get to submit to the deadline. That's not a position I want to be in, and I certainly don't want that position to get worse going forward. The other thing that I would note is then the other big work stream that we have is our public reporting work. And obviously we report that primarily to the Public Accounts Committee, and then, as Rodney says, if they don't wish to hold an inquiry, then to other committees. Obviously Public Accounts Committee stood back up this year, just in March. They have had quite a rich back catalogue because the Assembly have been down, and therefore a lot of their inquiries to date have been from a back catalogue of work, if you like, that we were able to continue when the Assembly wasn't functioning. That's obviously not the case going forward, and you'll be well aware we have a Public Accounts Committee who's very hungry, is holding lots of inquiries, and I certainly need to keep that work stream going to enable them to have a full programme of work going forward. As Rodney says then, when the Assembly did come back, we did have a lot of committees come to us outside of PAC and ask us to come. I had to say no in the early part of your mandate to those committees, because I simply did not have the staff and complement to be able to go to those committees. And again, it's not something I would like to do long term. This committee did give us the money to do that. As Rodney said, we simply didn't have the staff and complement to carry that out. And obviously we were trying to service PAC primarily. That's something that we would like to do going forward, and I know the Public Accounts Committee have now released a number of reports. We do anticipate then that we will be called upon, and certainly I think to make sure that scrutiny role, as you suggest, is fulfilled across this institution. I think if we can service those committees, I think it certainly would be to the benefit of governance and accountability if we were in a position to do that. It does come back to staff and to having then the ability to have a pipeline of products, if I can be so crass, to service those committees.
If I can maybe add just on the products that Doreen had mentioned there, one of the excellent products we produce every year are good practice guides, and they're very well received by the public sector. So there is a risk then, if any reduced funding going forward, they may be one of the first things we would have to not progress with.
Just to finish out your question, so circling right back to 25-26, and your reference to 7% or the 6.4 as we have presented it, so around about 2% of that is uncontracted increases to partner firms. those firms in the private sector that we work with, because audit fees have been increasing significantly. Higher standards, more scrutiny, audit quality is driving that up. So when we strip that out of our ask to the committee, it probably leaves us in the region of about a 4% year-on-year increase, which is arguably more, maybe in keeping with you might expect.
Thank you. And so then, for clarity from what you're saying, you're at a stretch, to be able to meet your statutory requirements on financial audit. You're already stretched and at risk, and you're being prevented from taking on the extra work with the statutory committees on top of that. So the pressure is very real here. And I just wanted to ask a further question in terms of, as you mentioned, the contracted out work. So whenever you look at the increase across the board, you can see the increase with your direct staff costs, but as you say, those that are contracted out is quite a significant increase projected. In terms of the volume of private sector work that you are engaging, would that be something that could be reduced in terms of aiming to reduce costs? But I suppose it brings us back to the same question: if you can't get the staff in-house to do it, how does the work get done? Yeah,
it's something we've been looking at this internally, because there's a lot of things at play here. The sheer number of private sector audit firms who are now in the audit space locally is reducing. So that gives us challenges for that work as well. Those that are in the market, their costs are increasing. So we've been looking at this from a number of angles, including value for money to the public purse as well, because we did see quite a significant rise in costs. To enable me to think about bringing more work in-house, I need more staff to service it. So it's a somewhat circular position we are in until we would get our staff and complement up. But certainly we think there is scope to provide more value for money in terms of the audit function if we could get our staff and complement up. And I suppose just on that, I digress a little bit, but we are seeing, and Rodney alluded to, our sister audit agencies are seeing it maybe ahead of us, we are seeing the market potentially start to change. We've had 2 very recent recruitments, and we're in application stage, shall I say, but our applicant numbers are double what they would have been in previous rounds of recruitment. And so there's probably a lot of factors at play which we can talk you through in due course, but it's certainly looking positive at this stage in terms of the ability to get staff in.
Okay. Nick, you were next.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a slightly different angle on this. You had in your corporate plan, you're very much focused on improving outcomes and accountability. Would this budget increase that you're asking for here, is that likely to contribute to that? Would you be able to deliver more on that ambition with the increased budget?
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's difficult for us to come to you asking for more next year when we're underspending. We realise that. But if we can bring our recruitment levels up to where we want to be, then we'll make full impact.
Yeah, and we are already starting to put changes into the system with regard to governance and accountability. So, for example, I've been in post now 2 years, and obviously just you look at things with fresh eyes, if you like. So one of the things that I realised is that there hasn't been a process whereby we keep track of Audit Office recommendations on public reports in the same way that we do on financial audits. So we have now put in place a system where they will be monitored, they will be progressed through audit committees, etc., going forward, and that should help with improving governance, accountability, and really keeping track on outcomes. And again, we further work that we wish to do with the Public Accounts Committee in terms of revisiting their recommendations as well, similar to how other jurisdictions do that. So again, that's early stages of consideration, but again, that's what we're driving to do, is really improve outcomes and improve public services ultimately.
Is that something, Chair, if I can just follow up, is that something you would anticipate with other, not just with PAC, but with all of the committees, to actually, as a sort of standing matter of course, to be updating committees on that tracking of outcomes on those reports? Is that something you would like to see happen?
Yes, absolutely. And we issued some departmental guides to each of the statutory committees in September, just for the House rising again post summer recess, and so that has a summary position presentation of all of our work relevant to that committee. It allows then the committee to see what we're doing relevant to them, and we would expect committees then to be briefed on any reports then going forward, and certainly, as I said before, we would love to be in a position then to go and give evidence to committees if called.
Ciara, have you any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one would be just in relation to your staff. Obviously, it seems to be critically important for you to progress the strategic plan, the key actions. Staff is the issue. Just in relation, you had mentioned obviously the rounds of recruitment that you do. Hopefully, there's 2 additional staff that will be involved and brought on more recently. Is there any other measures that you are taking to try and ensure that you can move forward with a full complement of staff?
Thank you, Ciara. And probably I undersold it a little bit in my earlier comments, but actually the last probably 4 or 5 months have been really encouraging and really exciting in many respects, because we have brought, I think I talked to you about this before, we've brought in a number of brand new trainees and indeed apprentices. So those 2 members of staff that I talked about earlier, those are purely on the financial audit, those are the accountants. We've also got 2 new members of staff joining us on performance audit, who come from effectively a non-accountancy background. I'm also delighted in the public gallery behind me, we have a new head of people and organisational development who's just joined us in the past month, and Jill has already shared with us some really excellent ideas about how we can improve our offering and how we can improve things like our greater employment flexibility. I like to think we offer excellent T's and C's, but looking at it with fresh eyes, she's made ideas to us at a senior level about how we might use data analytics to enhance and more target and a more diverse range of applicants that we might reach out to, potential developments in our brand and how we might reach out better to schools and universities. Again, we thought we'd been doing quite well there, but actually there's probably much more that we can do. So quite a range of things. I have a whole list in front of me. So if that all comes together, I'm optimistic. Again, it's just that lead time, because every recruitment process takes time to actually then get the talent into the organisation.
And if I could just add, we have been doing quite a lot around our brand, around corporate videos, targeted at different demographics of staff as well. Really going out into the universities. I think I mentioned last time I was here, we were recently at the recruitment fairs, in University of Ulster, in both Magee and in Belfast and at Queen's as well, and we are working with the accountancy professions in both of those universities as well, and we are about to offer placement to 2 of their master's students in accountancy for a 3-month period in the office, which ties in to the programme that Queen's are offering. I think our most recent rounds of applications that I referred to before does show that additional brand presence that we're having is starting to take effect. As with all of these things, it does take time, and I would agree with what Rodney has said and the work that Jill has been doing. We can always improve, we can always do more, and always adapt as well. So certainly I think we're very open to change and very open to trying new things, but certainly I think we're starting to see some of that come back. And I think one of the things as well for our work, and to say this to members, having the institution back up and running I think is quite a positive in terms of the work that we do and how that is attractive to potential members of staff as well. So that, I think that is a positive for us as well. So Brian?
I was just going to add, 5 years ago, the Audit Office had a full-time equivalent of 100 members of staff. So we've been gradually growing that over this past number of years. Rodney's alluded to earlier, 33 separate recruitment competitions in the past year. So we're sitting around about 120 there at the minute, and it's our aim, to get beyond 130.
Yeah, and we're really passionate about it. Sorry, folks, we'll all talk about this for a long time, but I'm just looking at the stats because Doreen gave me a bit of time to glance, and 33 recruitment competitions in 3 years for a small organisation is very significant, and we've introduced 49 new people into the organisation over that period. We've also lost 32, so there is a fair bit of change, and that's people moving on to other opportunities or indeed retiring. But I mean, we've increased by 17 there in 2 years. But that's quite a machinery for a small organisation. Relatively speaking, to other audit institutions. Our colleagues in the south have around about 200 members of staff. Wales is approximately 280. Scotland's about 330. The NAO's a completely different level in London at 950. So we are proportionately very small, and that is also something that if we could get to a better position, I might want to talk to the committee a bit more about in the years ahead, but I'd better walk before I run.
Ciara,
okay, thank you.
Content? Thank you. John, if you want to come in now, please.
Yeah, we've covered quite a bit of ground there, but staying on the theme of recruitment, I think the only additional question I could ask really is that if there is evidence that the numbers of applications are increasing, then is there a position where you can give us a timeline to when you expect to have vacant posts or required posts filled in relation to next year's budget?
Yeah, thank you, John. Really good question. I don't have a timeline to hand, but we have plans even in the next 4 or 5 months of this financial year to recruit people to enable us to try and get back up to that magical 130 FTEs. I have to be absolutely honest with the committee. I'm sceptical that we can do that. So whilst we've just surrendered £629,000, I could see a wee bit of more underspend between now and the end of the year, solely for exactly the same reasons. So okay. Can we get on the front foot? And sorry, this is a wee bit of a long-winded way of responding, but can we get on the front foot by the 1st of April? I'm doubtful, but we will be doing our best to try and fill the positions, and I guess that's why we're asking you to support us in the budget to give us the opportunity to incur those costs for the future.
For the following year, totally understand that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, John, content then?
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, members. Doreen, just this morning the committee has received a letter from the Department of Finance. We really haven't had very much chance to consider it, but I understand that you may have had sight of it. Mm-hmm. Could I invite you maybe to comment on the elements of it that concern your department?
Yeah, sure. Yes, Chair, I got a copy of the letter directly just after 9 o'clock this morning as well. So you'll appreciate in terms of the comments that have been made, there is analysis laid out with regard to our ask, which we concur with. It wasn't, I suppose, it wasn't my expectation as the independent auditor to receive comments around the operational running of the organisation. But that said, I do respect the Minister's comments, and I do wish to just talk to them. There's reference to an expected increase in income from outside sources. However, I suppose at this stage we're a wee bit perplexed what that reference refers to, because actually our income is due to go down next year, perhaps it is around an expectation, which we just discussed with you, but certainly we don't have any expected increased income factored into those figures. The consideration of a vacancy management plan, I suppose this is getting into the operational management of the organisation, and I think hopefully we have outlined to you really our plan, if you like, is to try and fill those vacancies as soon as possible to enable us to service all of the work. Now, to support planned levels of activity, a vacancy management plan to support planned levels of activity, we understand at this point, and my understanding would be that obviously I have statutory audit work, which I must do. The PAC, as I understand it, would have plans for us to service that committee, as we have been doing, to give them quite a rich and fulsome pipeline of products. And similarly, we've outlined before that we believe that committees want us to service them as well. So in terms of me trying to fill vacancies, I'm trying to fill it for that planned level activity. That said, and it's always been the case, should this committee want us to do less in that regard, or should the Public Accounts Committee want us to do less in that regard, I will respect that decision and work within the staff resources that I have. Absolutely.
Thanks very much, Serena, for being able to make those comments at such short notice. Is there anything else that the delegation want to bring to our attention before we conclude?
I could talk for ages, sure.
Smiling faces and silence.
You've probably
That's
other
great.
things to do.
Listen,
No,
thank you very
you.
much indeed
Thank
for
you.
coming along this morning.
Thank
It
you.
has been quite useful, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much,
sir.
everyone.
Thank you, members. Okay. Members, the next item on the agenda, item 8, is the Northern Ireland Public Service Ombudsman Draft Budget 25-26. I would refer members to the budget submission by the NIPSO on page 41 and correspondence from, and if so, on the October monitoring round at page 56 of the pack. Again, members will recall that at the last meeting the committee agreed to ask officials from NIPSO to be available at this meeting this morning to answer any further questions on their budget submission. So if any members have any questions, if they would just please indicate. So just like to welcome this morning Margaret Kelly, the Ombudsman, and Sean Martin, the Acting Deputy Ombudsman, and Kirsty McCall, Director of Governance and Support Services. You're all very welcome this morning. So just invite you to make any opening comments that you wish before we move to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to committee for asking us back. I suppose we don't have a lot of comments to make, and we're quite happy to ask questions. We've had a quick look at the DOF response to our budget. We just received that this morning, and we've had a little look, and I note there were some areas that DOF raised, and we are of course happy to answer committee questions on that. But I do also note and welcome DOF's overall support for our budget as presented to committee, and their recognition of the essential services that the office provides to both the public and public bodies, and their further recognition that this is a time when public services are under significant pressure, and therefore the role of the office, unfortunately some might say, becomes even more important. So while they have raised a number of issues, and I'm sure committee will ask me about that, overall I do have to say I welcome their support for the budget as presented.
Yeah, well, at the conclusion of the questions, Margaret, I will invite you to make further comment on the contents of the letter if you so wish. So at the last evidence session, you touched on the emotional impact some of your investigations have on you and your members of staff. Have you included any further planned support or assistance for staff members in this budget submission? And is there anything further that you could do to support your investigators?
Yeah, I'll pick that up. So there's a number of pieces of work we're taking forward. As part of the broader public service family, we have access to the services that the civil service have access to. Kirsty can probably name the specific service for us, but we have access where staff can phone and seek support, and there's also counselling available. But in addition to that, we also were doing work with colleague ombudsmen about putting bespoke arrangements in place for our staff to recognise the vicarious trauma that they suffer. And some of that involves
giving them a little bit of time afterwards, talking it through with them to help them deal with that. So I think we have made provision within the budget for sufficient support to be available to our staff to deal with the vicarious trauma that they then experience from the work that we do.
And just to add to that we have specifically started to run a programme on trauma-informed practice for our staff to help them deal with that, and that is by one of the senior staff from the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. But to be honest, the cost of doing that is minimal, and Ombudsman offices across the UK are actually very good at providing each other with that kind of access to training and support without necessarily charging each other. So there's not a huge budgetary cost to it, but there is a programme in place.
Thank you. The reduction in the backlog of determining investigations in the local government councillors is very welcome. How will your budget submission help to maintain that lower waiting time?
So obviously the investigation side of that jurisdiction falls to me. So we have made provision within the budget for sufficient. We've actually had quite an upturn in the number of referrals to us this year, and we're just about to up the number of staff. So we have enough cover within the arrangement with the Department of Finance to allow us to ask for more money where we need it through a technical transfer mechanism, so that we can up the number of staff. So I think at the start of each year we look forward and think how many cases will be brought to us, and we have enough staff to deal with that. If during the year that number goes up, then we can call on additional resources to up the number of staff, whether we move people internally or whether we go external then and bring in additional resources. But we're very focused on keeping the position we've got to on that. And I'm pleased to report to committee we've continued to do that through this year, and expect that we will keep that where the committee would expect it to be, that those investigations are completed as quickly as we can.
And I think if I could add that has been about having the staff and having the resource, but it has also been about approach. And I do think it's particularly important that is fair and proportionate. A breach of the code is not meant to be a punitive response, so it is actually about improving learning, and I think that is the other thing that Sean and the investigation team have done. So all of the regulators across the UK, and that is in effect a regulatory role, have moved to an enabling approach, and that means when we get a complaint, obviously reaching out to the complainant, but also reaching out to the counsellor by phone and seeking to get counsellors to engage more proactively with the office. Those thresholds are still there. The investigation team deals with that, and that is obviously not something that I look at, but that overall approach of being fair, being proportionate and encouraging learning so that counsellors do not inadvertently breach the code, I think has also been part of why we have seen that. It has been slightly more challenging this year because there has been that increase, but I hope that there's been some movement around people's experience of that, and we continue to engage with all stakeholders who make complaints under the code to ensure that we understand what that experience is.
I really welcome that, because I suppose it is a worrying time too for those who have had complaints made against them, so that's to be welcome. I'll open it to the floor now, and I'll invite the Vice Chair, Diane, to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming to speak to us on this. I think since our last meeting there was definitely at least a couple of high profile reports that came out that really emphasises the importance of the work of your office, and I know from watching some of the coverage of those it's suggesting improvements and just a sense of closure to give to some of those families. Like the feedback and the impact of your work is so important. And I think you had noted in the previous meeting that over half of the cases that are coming into you are health related. So I just wanted to ask how you think that the implementation of the complaints handling procedure in the Health and Social Care Trust will impact the levels of your work and the budget in future years.
Yeah, so in terms of the complaint standards approach which we're taking, and we're very heavily engaged with the health service just at the minute. We've been engaging with the trusts for a long time. We're reaching out now to the wider parts of the health service in terms of GPs, care homes and so on, to make sure that everybody is aware of what we're trying to achieve. What we're looking for is a cultural change. And Margaret and I and another colleague are at the Health Committee tomorrow, and one of the issues that we no doubt will address is the need for candour. Because what our experience is, if you get the culture around complaints right and you're actually really open with people at the start, you save a huge amount of resource. Where people lose trust, and public trust is one of the key things we drew attention to in our last year's annual report, that need for trust. And to build that trust, you need to be open. So while the work on the complaint standards is twofold, one is about the procedure, which is 2-stage, 5 and 20 days, and trying to speed that up. But the real focus is a cultural change around openness. And that will take some time, and there's work going on with the Department of Health around a being open framework, and there's consultations, as those members of the Health Committee will know, are due on that, and then issues around statutory duties of candour, both for organisations and individuals. But I think our focus is about being open, and I think if the health things will go wrong, you know, and if you are open with people, it's surprising how accepting they are if that is early in a complaints process. But if it has to be dragged out, it does take a huge amount of resource, both for that organisation, for us, and huge trauma, I think, not to forget the trauma that causes for the people who are bringing their complaints. So I think we would take that twin-track approach where we're looking at improving the procedure, trying to make it more timely, but really encouraging that move to a much more open and just culture. And that includes supporting staff as well and enabling them to be open, because some of the work that the Department of Health have done around being open suggests that staff want to be open, but they don't feel able. So I think, you know, it's really important that we put mechanisms in place to enable them to be open where things have gone wrong and to provide proper answers.
Thank you. And in your bid for the budget going forward, it was it is a large percentage terms of increase at 11%. But you had outlined the pressures on staff, the review of the pay, and difficulty with staff turnover. So we can see what is driving that. But I was wondering, in light of the autumn budget statement and the increase in national insurance contributions, have you had a chance to factor in how much extra that would be in the total overall bid?
Yeah, so in terms of monetary terms, that's about 60,000 for us in terms of the impact of the national insurance changes. So, I mean, there's been some communication, I believe, back and forward with Department of Finance officials. And our view is if the broad public sector approach is that is going to be given to people as an additional top-up to their budget, obviously we would seek it. But if it is to absorb, we, like everyone else, would then absorb that. So we're not making a specific ask to have that added to our budget at this point. We're content to progress on the basis that we'll do what everybody else does in terms of the climate that we're in, and that's obviously additional pressure on public sector across the board.
No, absolutely, and I think then the Finance Minister had referenced it in her letter, this morning as well, that on consideration of this probably need a resubmission of the bid to address those procedures. But
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Nick, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of following on pay, the pay and grading review was referenced by the Finance Minister in her letter. Can you give us an idea of where that sits in terms of the approval process and what the process for that would be? Because I think the Minister was quite clear that it hasn't been approved yet, and also I suppose if it were not to be approved, Finance Minister had raised maybe implications if it was approved, but I'd be interested if it's not approved, what the impact would be on your ability to recruit and retain staff.
So I think there's sometimes a little bit of misunderstanding and a lack of clarity around the office and where it sits. So in terms of the independence of the office is not an arm's length public body of any particular department, and that includes the Department of Finance. We sit independent of that, and in fact you as committee are my place for scrutiny and, in that respect, approval. So having come to committee and set out before you last year my difficulties, and committee then having provided me with funding to go and look at that, and having come back to committee again and said, okay, we've looked at this, committee, here are my options if I'm going to address my really quite serious retention issues. my approval sits with you as committee. Obviously, I have not given you the detail of that because we're still in a process where we have not yet shared that with staff. If committee required a closed session of more briefing, I would of course be happy to give that. But the approval sits through this mechanism for all of this in my budget. And I do understand that sometimes that can be a little unclear, but when the Department of Finance is looking overall, but you are actually my scrutiny and my committee, and I am an officer of this Assembly, effectively appointed by the Assembly, so...
Whether intentionally or not, the letter does
some misunderstanding.
Read as if the Finance Minister was expecting to provide that approval, so I think that's important clarification to have on the record.
The clerk would be able to advise the committee on what the committee's view would be around that, but say our understanding is the mechanism for approval for that would sit with the committee.
Yes, the committee, Chair, if you allow me to, the committee approves the budget for NIPSO and therefore everything contained within it, which includes in the last budget, which was approved by the committee, options for pay and grading review, and then obviously the outworkings of that come into this financial year.
No, that's helpful. And obviously we can discuss actions arising from this briefing. There's possibly some there in relation to that. But that's fine. That's all from me. Thank you.
Tendick?
Yes.
John, you were next, please. Thank you.
Right, Chair, you calling me there, yeah?
Yes, please, Sean.
Right.
Sorry.
Little bit of sound interruption there. We mentioned their staff levels and also retaining people in posts. Can I ask in relation to the 5 posts mentioned in the submission, is there a timeline on appointment and how does that fit with this financial year compared to the year ahead and the proposed budget? And also, are there any plans in place to try to improve the situation around retaining staff?
I think in terms of the timeline, we would expect to actually advertise those roles as soon as we have an approval on budget, so that we have those roles in post for the start of the new year, because the work is there for them. Even since we've reported to committee earlier, the number of complaints have continued to rise, so we have a great need for those staff. So in terms then of, and without getting into too much detail on the pay and grading review in terms of how that would help us with retention, one of the things that the pay and grading review has done is extend some of our scales. So particular key posts, there is an uplift in salary, so we would hope that would keep people. But I think one of the things that really I think we would find beneficial is that the civil service salary scales are very short now, and people don't feel they're progressing, whereas the proposals before us extend some of those scales. So we would hope with the increase in salary of some key roles and the lengthening of scales that would add to our retention and take down our overall staff turnover.
And John, if I could add, I mean, we do significant staff engagement, and I think, as I said last time, I think I have an excellent staff team, but our engagement score is 83%, and that compares to 54% for the NICS overall. And staff have been really clear with us that those staff are going primarily for those reasons of financial uplift and in some for career progression. So, I am hopeful that if we address this issue, we will settle down for a while.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank John. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Ciara, if I could bring you in now, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've just one question now, just finally. Could you tell us just more about the impact the own initiative investigations piece is having on your overall budget requirements going forward?
In terms of the size of that team, so our own initiative team is 5 staff in total. So it's less than 10% of our staff. So Kirsty could probably tell us what it is in budgetary terms exactly, but it's not a huge amount of our resource. We have the option internally to obviously reallocate those to deal with pressures, elsewhere, and obviously the own initiative things. It's a difficult balance, Ciara, between those bigger systemic issues and trying to address them when you're faced with an increasing workload. Thus far, we've been able to maintain the resource in our own initiative function. And I think we would like to be able to do so. We have a number of larger areas of work that we're working on that we think would be really beneficial to the Assembly, you know, in terms of issues that the public are facing around public services. I don't want to go into too much detail because we haven't announced it, but I think we would like to try to maintain that level of resource, you know, and that's more proactive work rather than reactive to complaints. Though I have to say, quite a lot of the issues we look at come in through our complaints, or people coming to us and asking us, could we take forward an own initiative investigation? So I say exactly in budgetary terms, we could come back on that, but I say it's a team of 5.
No, thank you for that, and I think it is critically important. A lot of your work is reactive, and we need to be proactive. So it's good to hear that at least the 5 staff complement team is going to be sustained and moving forward. So thank you for that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for attending this morning, but I just invite you if there's anything further you want to add maybe before you leave, or if you wish to make further comment on the letter that we all received this morning.
I suppose there's just one other issue in the letter that I think might be helpful to pick up, and that is the Finance Minister seemed to raise a concern about the potential pay and regrading having an impact on some other staff groups, and I suppose it is perhaps just to reassure committee that in many respects my staff grouping is unique, and that while we looked at other regulators in Northern Ireland, really utility regulator, water regulators, all of whom were paid significantly more, we also benchmarked across the other ombuds offices across the UK, and so really pay and regrading in my office as a standalone office doesn't have an impact across the civil service. In fact, it might have been a little different if I'd have moved everybody to a higher civil service grade, but in terms of doing it this way, there isn't an issue, so it doesn't have a repercussive impact, which I know the Minister raised. I mean, other than that, I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to add. I thank committee. I think, you know, we've had an opportunity to really set out the issues that the office deals with, and I thank you for the scrutiny that you've given it and the consideration you've given it.
Thank you for the service that you provide to the public. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want me to acknowledge we had a meeting yesterday? You want to do it now?
Yeah, just before they come in.
Right, okay. Okay, members, we're heading on now to agenda item 9, which is the Northern Ireland Assembly draft budget 25-26. You'll notice that the clerk is putting his coat on and gathering his belongings. He has decided to recluse himself from this particular piece of business because he has what he feels is an interest in it. So he will be replaced by someone who is just about to appear now. Very welcome, Shane, to the committee. Just for the committee's information, at the invitation of the Assembly staff, the Vice Chair and myself and Nick met with the committee yesterday for a short and very informal meeting just to clarify some of the issues that they wish to give more clarification on. And you will be you'll be pleased to know that we took notes, and those notes are available for anybody that wants to see them. But it was a very short and a very informal meeting, but I think it's important that the committee are advised of that, and that is placed on the record. Thank you. So just refer members to the following. The Secretariat briefing paper is on page 58, the NIAC briefing paper on page 61, the NIAC corporate strategy at page 78, and correspondence from the NIAC on the October monitoring round is on page 80 of your pack. So I just await the Good morning, Leslie. Good morning, Stephen. You're very welcome to the meeting. So I just invite you, if you wish to make any opening comments before we move to questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. And can I also thank the committee for the important work that it does in scrutinising the Assembly Commission's budget. Before I get into the detail of the budget, it might be helpful just to recap on the Assembly's structure and work. The Assembly Commission is unlike any other bodies in the Assembly. It is a corporate body and not a committee, responsible for providing the property, staff and services to support the work of the Assembly. The Assembly itself does not have a legal personality, and therefore it's the Assembly Commission that has the legal liability or the legal ability as a corporate body to appoint staff and create contracts to provide services and other functions. The Assembly Commission has delegated its functions, including responsibility for the management of staff, to me, subject to some conditions and exceptions, such as approval of the annual budget, staff salaries and pensions, and expenditure in excess of certain limits. The organisation is structured into 3 directorates. Corporate Services is responsible for the Assembly Commission's main corporate functions of finance, human resources, building services and usher services. Legal Governance and Research Services, which provides in-house legal advice to the Speaker, Assembly Commissions and Committee, as well as responsible for the Examiner of Statutory Rules, RAISE, Procurement, Information Standards and Governance. Parliamentary Services has responsible for meetings of the Assembly and its committees, development of private members' bills and scrutiny of legislation, Hansard, and the Assembly's IT, communications, education and public engagement services. We also have a corporate support unit which supports the Speaker's Office, the Assembly Commission and the Clerk Chief Executive's Office. I've provided a detailed paper to the committee setting out the various categories of expenditure along with an overview of what is required within each. I will therefore seek to highlight the most salient points in the budget and how it differs from the 24-25 budget as agreed by the committee earlier this year. Earlier this morning we were copied in on the Department of Finance's view of the Assembly Commission's budget, and while extremely late I will endeavour to address the remarks of the department in my submission. The budget required to support the work of the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee has been separately itemised in our submission, as these costs are funded centrally from HM Treasury in a separate allocation. And following delivery of the Chancellor's budget on the 30th of October, the rate of employers' national insurance will increase from the 1st of April 2025, and also the threshold over which national insurance is payable will reduce. This will result in an estimated increase of £555,000 in 25-26, which will be split across staff salaries, member salaries, support staff costs, members' travel costs and income. The Department has confirmed that the Chancellor will provide additional funding to the public sector to support it with the additional costs associated with these changes, and the funding will come directly from Treasury. However, given that the Assembly Commission is only presenting its budget today, the Department has advised that we should incorporate those additional costs in our budget, and these have been incorporated in our submission, and this will avoid the need for a further allocation during the year. And now to the numbers. Starting with income, the only thing really to highlight is that substantially all of the income that the Assembly Commission receives is a result of the recovery of ministerial salaries, and this is only the additional salary that is paid to each minister over and above that which they receive as virtue of being a member, and that includes employers' national insurance and pension costs. A small amount of additional income will be generated from a contribution toward the costs of running the Knowledge Exchange Seminar Series programme, along with a small amount of money earned through the Post Office. We don't expect to have any staff secondments this year, and therefore there's no provision for the recovery of any staff salary costs. Moving on now to members' salaries and expenses. As the committee will be aware, previously all expenditure associated with members was payable under the provisions of the Assembly Members' Salaries and Expenses Determination 2016, as amended by the Assembly Members' Salaries and Expenses Amendment Determination 2020. On the 1st of October, the Assembly Commission agreed a new 2024 determination. However, a publication date has yet to be agreed. So the budget for 25-26 is based on this new draft determination. If I move on now to members' salaries. The increase in the budget requirement is primarily due to the annual uplift of £500 per member if the Consumer Price Index in September of the previous year is greater than 1%. Member salaries have not been reviewed since 2016. The increase also includes the additional national insurance contribution rates, which are due from April of next year. So this means now that members' salaries will increase and be around £53,000 from 1st of April 25, which is £19,000 less than the 24-25 salaries payable to an MS in Wales or an MSP in Scotland. There's no provision in the budget for any increases that the Independent Remuneration Board might make to members' salaries, and the budget doesn't seek to anticipate any determination that the Remuneration Board might make when it is established. If such time there is a new determination, then this will be notified to the Department of Finance and the appropriate funding sought. If I move on now to constituency costs, and this covers all of the costs associated with running a member's office, including support staff salary costs and winding up costs. And it's important to note that the Assembly Commission's budget for 24-25 was based on the assumption that the Assembly Commission would publish a new Assembly Members' Expenses Determination during the year. At its meeting on the 1st of October, the Assembly Commission agreed a new determination. However, a date for publication is still to be agreed. The 25-26 budget is, however, based on the provisions of the new draft 2024 determination. The majority of the additional budget requirement is entirely due to the cumulative impact of the pay award for member staff that will take place in 25-26. Member support staff costs also include provision for additional resources should a member have to take an extended period of leave following the birth or adoption of a baby. For constituency office rent, an increase in the annual allowance has been incorporated in the draft 2024 determination, which has resulted in increases of about £45,000 for rent and £22,000 for rates. As members' leases expire at different times, the 25-26 budget assumes that all existing leases will continue until their expiry at the current rate, and that any new leases awarded will now be awarded at the new rate. The increased budget requirement for constituency office operating costs relates to an inflationary increase plus a further £300 per member to enable them to procure their own print capability following the expiry of the Assembly Commission's centralised printer contract. In addition to this allowance, provision was made for an increase from £2,000 to £2,500 per member for health, welfare, training and recruitment of staff. If I turn now to members' travel costs, these provide for the amounts to be paid to members in respect of their assembly and constituency travel allowance as set by the 2024 determination, with an inflationary uplift included. A small provision has also been made for claims by members for the cost of overnight accommodation in Belfast should they be working after 10 p.m. on parliamentary matters, and this is a new provision in the draft 2024 determination. If I turn now to members' other costs, this category of costs includes provision for items such as disability costs, ill health retirement costs, and resettlement allowance. The new draft 2024 determination will extend the provision under disability costs to allow members to recover the costs incurred in making reasonable adjustments to their constituency office where such costs are not included in their lease. And this will be either for their staff or to facilitate members of the public. Turning now to security measures, an amount of £4,000 per member was included in the 2024-25 budget relating to the provision of security measures at constituency offices and/or a member's private dwelling, as this was anticipated to be a provision in the new 2024 determination. This is a per-mandate allowance, and given that the new 2024 determination has yet to be published, it is not anticipated that members would be able to utilise the full allowance during the current year, and therefore some of these costs have therefore been deferred to 25-26. If I turn now to staff costs, these relate to the salary costs for Assembly Commission staff. And the increase in staff costs consists of a budgeted pay award for staff, the increase in the employer's national insurance that I mentioned earlier, and a number of new posts. The pay award for staff is based on the Department of Finance's planning assumption of a 3% pay increase. 19 new posts have been included in the budget, offset by the removal of 3 posts that were supporting the Corporate Systems Review project. The new posts are important new posts that are primarily required to support members in their role of scrutinising legislation, both from a legal and parliamentary services perspective. And the need for these posts arises as a result of recommendations made from the RHI inquiry and systematic weaknesses identified in the Media House judgment. They will also enable better organisational resilience in the Bill Office, Business Office and clerking teams, to expand in-house communications and broadcast production capability, to assist the Assembly Commission and committees in communicating their work to the public through increased use of social media. Moving now to administration costs. The Assembly Commission's administration costs cover a wide range of expenditure, including committee travel and expenses, building costs, rates, utilities, third-party costs for supporting business-critical IT systems, and recurring contractual costs for things like broadcasting, cleaning and catering. Historically, there has been a significant underinvestment in IT infrastructure within the Assembly Commission, so projects are ongoing to modernise our IT infrastructure to make it fit for purpose, to ensure that the Assembly is supported appropriately and that the network is secure from increasing risk of cyber threat. The 24-25 budget included £1.8 million of costs associated with remedial works to the roof of Parliament buildings. There has been a revision to these costs, and the updated assessment is now that they are likely to cost in the region of £2.4 million, with an anticipated cost of £400,000 for legal fees. While some investigatory works have been ongoing, it is expected that only £700,000 of costs will be incurred in the current year, consisting of about £500,000 in roof costs and £200,000 in legal fees, leaving the remainder of costs of £1.9 million to be transferred into 2025-26. It had been hoped that the issue of the roof repair and the remediation works would be resolved by a mediation process initiated by the Assembly Commission, whereby the architect and/or the building contractor would undertake the work at their own expense. However, this has not been possible, and the Assembly Commission did commence legal proceedings. It is hoped that the full cost will be recovered through these legal proceedings. However, in the interest of prudence, no income has been budgeted. Also, as part of the 10-year maintenance plan for Parliament buildings, a number of building maintenance projects will expected to take place during 2025, as there's a lot of work required to maintain the building in its current state. Payments then onto the Financial for Assistance Political Parties scheme. And really, the costs incurred in the budget reflect the new 2024 FAP scheme, with an inflationary uplift for 25-26. We then move to depreciation and impairment charges, and these are based on the expenditure both in the preceding years and the current years, and also an expected increase in the land and valuation of Parliament buildings. And finally, if I can make a few remarks regarding capital investment. The Assembly Commission has identified the need to deliver a range of capital projects during 25-26. A number of these projects are carried forward from earlier years, and that's due to movement in the timing of projects, and then there have been another number of new projects have been identified. The most significant cost is to install a partial electronic access security system. This is a project that we've been attempting to progress over the last few years, but it is now progressing following engagement with CPD. And while the initial costs were included in market sounding at that time, these have now substantially increased. Other costs include a project to replace specialised legislative drafting software, which is coming to the end of its useful life, and this is used to produce all the legislative documents used in plenary to the required format and standard. A number of other IT costs have been identified, primarily to replace or upgrade the Assembly's IT network and to deliver a new Assembly website. It is also planned that the ongoing programme of upgrading and improving accommodation and facilities in the building will continue during 25-26, with projects such as the Members' Lounge refurbishment, upgrading lifts, and the replacement of automatic fire detection systems. The programme for capital projects is ambitious, but the Assembly Commission believes it is achievable. And just before I finish and move on to the query submitted by the Department of Finance, I would just like to record my thanks, Chair, to the Assembly Commission staff. The period since the resumption of normal business has been extremely challenging as we sought to rebuild teams and to recruit a significant number of vacant positions. Throughout this, staff have continued to demonstrate their dedication and professionalism and to support the Assembly and its committees in all of its requirements. So therefore I would like to record my thanks to all of the staff for that work that they do on a day in and day out basis. And now, Chair, if you were content, I was going to go through the queries that the Department of Finance had submitted. If that would be helpful.
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. So the first query that the department submitted was in relation to the Windsor framework costs, and it said that the Audit Committee should not agree these as part of our budget as they will be separately funded. So you'll note that in our budget submission we did separately identify them, but we included them really for a matter of completeness and transparency, but the figures are there separately, so therefore they don't need to be approved by the Audit Committee. There was also query then about the 3% pay award assumption for staff that's been included in the budget. So the Assembly Commission doesn't have a multi-year pay deal in place, and therefore the pay award for next year will obviously have to be negotiated in year. So we follow the Department of Finance's planning assumption, which did recommend the use of a 3% planning assumption, and that is what the Assembly has done in prior years. And really, on the basis that we don't have a multi-year pay deal in place, we believe that that is the most appropriate planning assumption at this point in time. The Department of Finance then raised the need for the additional posts. So again, in our submission, we did put in some level of detail about the range of posts required. And as I said in my submission, these are really to identify and address weaknesses that have been identified through the RHI inquiry and through the recent Media House judgment. The department did query whether we have taken a vacancy factor into account in relation to those posts, and we have. So we do include a vacancy factor in our budget submission, and that includes the new posts. The department seemed content with the IT costs that we had included and also with the costs associated with the roof. And then there was just a query regarding the expected income in relation to the Knowledge Exchange seminar series, and they really were seeking whether that represents full cost recovery. So just to explain, the Knowledge Exchange seminar series is a partnership between the Assembly Commission's Research Service, RAISE, and a number of university partners. And this arrangement is formalised through an MOU, which also deals with the allocation of costs. And under the MOU, all partners agree to share a percentage of the actual costs incurred in running the programme. And under that arrangement, RAISE pays for 1/5 of the costs, and the remaining 4/5 are then recovered from the other partners. The department did query whether the completion of projects was realistic. Obviously, Chair, ourselves and the Assembly Commission do believe that those projects are realistic at this point in time. Obviously, there are processes to go through in terms of public procurement and so on, and therefore we can never say with absolute certainty whether the projects will be deliverable or not in year, but certainly our anticipation is that we will be endeavouring to deliver those in year, and therefore we believe that they are appropriate to be included in the budget this year. So hopefully, Chair, that does address all of the queries raised by the department, and equally we're happy now to take any further questions or go back on any of the comments in relation to the department's queries.
Thank you. Sorry, with an apology, I omitted to name the delegation for the record. So just for the record, it's Ms. Leslie Hogg, Chief Executive and Clerk to the Assembly, and Mr. Stephen Baxter, Director of Corporate Services. And also, Leslie, there you talked about and put your appreciation for the staff in this building on record, and I would certainly like to personally concur with that, and I'm sure I speak for all the members in this committee that we really do appreciate how smoothly the operations run in this building on a daily basis, and we really do appreciate that. Thank you very much. So moving into questions, I've just a couple to ask, and then I'll open it to the members. But how will the Commission ensure that the proposed increase in staff complement will actually result in enhanced scrutiny?
We have put quite a bit of work into looking at the recommendations both from RHI and the Media House judgment, and we've also been doing quite a bit of work looking at pre- and post-legislative scrutiny. So we do believe that the posts will provide very real and practical support to members on a day-to-day basis to assist them with that scrutiny function. We don't plan to allocate the posts specifically to individual committees, but we would like to keep them flexible so that they can be utilised in committees as and when appropriate, and again depending on the workload with the individual committees. So we do absolutely anticipate that these will bring very real additional support to members to enable them to complete their scrutiny function.
Thank you. Leslie, this is the building here and the whole estate is absolutely beautiful, and it's great to see that it's so open to the public to come and experience it. But it's clear that that the Stormont building is a very expensive one, obviously, to run and maintain. And does the Commission have a long-term plan to lower costs, or alternatively to try and raise revenue to help with these costs?
Certainly we do have a very detailed plan in terms of sustainability for the building, and I might ask Stephen just to comment a bit further on that. So we do monitor the costs very closely and seek to reduce those and minimise those as much as possible. So I'll maybe then pick up in terms of the income, and then I'll ask Stephen to come in just and talk about the sustainability and how we seek to minimise costs. In terms of further revenue generation, Chair, we did previously do weddings and certain other functions which brought some additional funding to the Commission. But in reality, the building is primarily here for the use of members and for the Assembly, and really the amount of additional income that was generated through those was not significant. There was a significant amount of additional work associated with them, and at the end of the day, the Commission didn't feel that Parliament buildings should be seen as, for example, a wedding venue, and that its preference was that the building should be made available to use for members and for the Assembly to promote the work of the Assembly and to engage with the public. And therefore, we really don't envisage doing anything further in that regard, Chair. Maybe ask Stephen now to speak on the issue of the building.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. And just to finish Leslie's points, we do encourage the public to attend Parliament buildings and experience the restaurant in particular, and to take a tour of the building, and we're very keen for that to happen. It's part of our corporate strategy in terms of engagement with the public moving forward. In relation to environmental management, we are accredited against ISO 14001, which is a set of standards or best practices for organisations to minimise their environmental footprint, and we've been fully accredited in September this year against that, with no minor or major recommendations in that regard. So we're continuing to monitor that, and we are looking to produce a new sustainability strategy next year, looking at how we can improve on that further.
The other thing is the members are commenting about the extensive scaffolding at the back of the building, and I understand the reasons why it's there, and people are saying, well, there's not much work going on at the moment, why the need for it. So maybe you could, for the record, just explain why it's there presently and what role it's serving.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, Chair. Well, as you know, we've been progressing litigation, and we've done considerable work previously with our own experts in terms of the issues with the roof and how those would need to be remediated. We've been working with CPD in terms of progressing the actual roof repairs themselves, but CPD wanted to undertake further inspection works itself prior to commencing a procurement process to enable the full remediation works to be done. And also there are some additional health and safety repair works that are being done at the minute. So the additional scaffolding at this stage is really to enable those additional inspections to be done. That work will then inform the scope of the procurement process, and therefore that will inform the actual work that needs to be undertaken itself. I don't know if there's anything else.
Yeah, and to that regard, was part of Leslie's submission earlier, she outlined the fact that we'd look to spend £500,000 this financial year. That's really in relation to the rear parapet in particular, where we would look to put that right, restore it to its former state, and remove the scaffolding at the rear of the building, which has a significant operational impact as regard to transport at the back of the building currently. So we hope to complete that work by March 2025.
Thank you very much for that. Now the members, Diane, if you wish to come in.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for coming along today to discuss this. And I would echo your sentiments, Leslie, in terms of thanks to the Commission staff as a new MLA. Whenever things kicked off earlier this year, really appreciated the support from the staff across the board. I just wanted to ask, given so much of your budget submission relates to the 2024 determination, which you've said has been agreed, why has it not been published yet, and when can we expect to see that?
Okay, well, the Commission has agreed to say the outline of the determination, and it's really a matter for the Commission now to determine a date for publication. So that was considered at its most recent meeting and will be considered again at its next meeting later this month. But I would be optimistic that the publication would take place during the 24-25 year. And certainly the Commission's intention is that the determination would then be backdated to the 1st of April 2024, so that members would receive the full allocation under the determination.
Thank you, Chair.
John, if you could come in now, please.
Chair, yeah, thank you, and thanks to Leslie and Stephen both for this. I want to add also, as Diane did there, the gratitude expressed yourself, Chair, to the Assembly staff. We're very grateful, and we're very aware of the massive amount of catch-up has to be done on the point of restoration of the Assembly, which happened this year. And on that point, can I ask, in relation to the budget and the numbers of staff posts that have been filled, can either Leslie or Stephen or both give us some indication of the difference it makes within a financial year when the Assembly does have restoration? And also in terms of planning ahead in that regard?
Well, it's very challenging. Certainly whenever the Assembly resumed normal business, we had about 50 vacant posts at that time. And really that's the basis of prudence, in that when the Assembly wasn't sitting, there really is very limited justification for bringing staff in at that time, other than if the posts are absolutely essential. So following the resumption of normal business then, the Assembly Commission took steps quickly to identify and make permanent recruitment appointments where possible, and where that wasn't possible and we had to run additional recruitment competitions, then we've been filling the posts on a temporary basis through agency, and we now have an accelerated programme whereby we're conducting the rest of the permanent recruitments, and that will continue into next year as well. So yes, it's a very onerous process and there's quite a bit of time, and there's obviously then a lot of work informing committees again and establishing teams and in bringing the new staff up to speed and ensuring that they are fully converse with the work of the committees that they're required to do.
Okay, thank you for that.
Intent, John. Ciara, you next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Leslie and Stephen, for a very detailed and comprehensive report. Just two questions. One question, Leslie, within paragraph 49, I think it's page 68 in your report, you mentioned in relation to resource gaps in strategic planning, corporate governance, and it's been assessed. Is there any further update on that? And you said that you don't see any impact in relation to additional provision for 25-26. So it'd be useful just to, if there's any update on that and the current assessments.
All right, I just missed the last part. So I did get the query around the corporate governance, and then I just missed the last bit about next year.
You noted that there would be no additional provision for 25-26 going forward in relation to the resource gap. So just further clarity on that.
Okay, so we're currently looking at what the best structure and mechanism might be to fill some of those gaps. So that's a project that we're currently looking at, and given that we hadn't identified what the proposed structure is likely to be going forward, we didn't feel we could include it in the budget submission at this time, because there's still a little bit more work needs to be done. But as and when we complete that work, we'll have discussions with the Assembly Commission and therefore see whether those posts can be recruited next year or not, or whether we need to seek additional budget provision for those in year.
Okay, thank you. And just secondly, it's in relation to the remedial work that's been carried out on the roof. And obviously I'm conscious now that additional work's being done. What confidence do you have through the likes of CPD in relation to bringing forward a contractor and having all the work completed by the end of the next financial year?
Well, the timing is difficult to predict. As I mentioned earlier, we'll have to go through a procurement process and then the works will have to be undertaken. We are trying to progress that as quickly as we can. While we would hope that the work would be completed during 25-26, until we complete the procurement process, it's very difficult to say that with absolute certainty. However, on the grounds of prudence, we have budgeted the full amount in 25-26. And then in a similar vein to the current year, that if we identified that all of that work wasn't able to be completed in 25-26, we would then release and hand back any budget provision that wasn't required and move that into the following year.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
And Ciara, right, Nick, you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. And your opening remarks were very thorough, I think, in terms of covering most of the issues raised by the Finance Minister. I just had a couple of questions. One was about the recruitment and the posts that you're looking to see introduced in the next financial year. What sort of challenges do you face in terms of actually filling those in a timely way? Is that something that can be difficult, and are you confident that those 16, that's deliverable in the year? It feels like it should be, but just to get an idea of that, and I certainly would want to put on record my thanks to the staff in the building, and I think anything that enhances the scrutiny role particularly is to be welcomed. And then I just had a separate question on IT. I think it was welcome that the Finance Minister felt those requests were reasonable, but obviously that is a really critical part of the infrastructure of what we do here, particularly around cybersecurity and some of those risks. So I suppose I wanted to maybe ask a slightly different question to the Minister. Are you confident that actually that's enough in terms of what we actually need? Because with the IT goes down, obviously there's the reputational risk, the security risk, and the rest of the operation of the business of this place. So it's just to get a sense on that.
Okay. If I pick up the recruitment point first of all, we see these additional posts as absolutely key in supporting the committees and members to do their work. and given that they effectively are resulting from criticism in the RHI report and also in the Media House judgment, we believe it's imperative to get those posts recruited as quickly as possible. So we do envisage being able to do that, whether they're filled initially on a temporary basis and then permanent. You know, there's various options that we can take forward, but we would intend to fill those as quickly as we can. On the IT side, I might defer to Stephen.
Yeah, thanks. I think you're right. I guess you never fully mitigate the cybersecurity risk, but what a recent report has shown with regards to the infrastructure here within the Assembly Commission is that it is legacy equipment and it is end of life, and in that regard there's a number of significant improvements need to be made to invest in the infrastructure and to move to modern technology, and that's the reason for some of this investment here today. We are continuing to test our readiness for a cybersecurity incident, and we will be doing that in detail tomorrow as part of a business continuity exercise. So we're aware of the risk and we're looking to mitigate it, but we will never fully mitigate it, and I would suggest that there'll be a continued series of investment in our infrastructure in the following years to make sure that we're in the best possible position moving forward.
In terms of what's deliverable in the next financial year, you're confident that the ask there covers the needs as far as can be predicted?
As far as can be predicted at the moment, and we are working with trusted partners in terms of Microsoft and others, experts in the field who are helping us in the roadmap and planning of that activity. So we do believe what we've outlined here is achievable next year, but as I said earlier, the position is constantly evolving.
And maybe if I could just come back on that as well. I mean, there still will be further work to be done in future years, but we really are going through quite a radical transformation in terms of our whole IT infrastructure, and therefore there's a certain amount of capacity within our own capability internally and with the additional capacity that we are sort of buying in or procuring. But there's really only so much you can do in 1 year to do it in a planned and managed way, but there certainly will be works that will continue beyond that.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the questions. Is there anything else maybe you want to add before you depart?
No, thanks very much. And just on behalf of the staff, they would very much appreciate the comments that you've made. And equally, if you do have any further queries or comments, we'd be very happy to answer those after the meeting.
Thank you very much for your attendance at the committee this morning. Thank you. Right, members, we're moving then to item 10 on the agenda, which is correspondence, and just refer you to the correspondence table at page 85 of the pack. And I'd ask you if you're content to action the correspondence as suggested on the table. Are we content? Thank you. And can I refer members to the item of table correspondence from the Committee for Finance in respect of the Minister of Finance oral statement on public expenditure 2024-25 October monitoring. Are you content to note that letter? Okay, just for the record, I would express my personal disappointment that this letter was only received. We did invite this letter back in October, 21st of October. And it's rather disappointing and doesn't make the scrutiny work of this committee any easier if we are only receiving such detailed correspondence on the morning, literally within an hour of our meeting. So for the record, I would express my personal disappointment about that, and the committee may wish to ask the clerk, we can talk about that in closed session, to respond accordingly to the Department of Finance.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just think, as well as noting our disappointment with how late this letter was, I think that would just be important to give credit to all three of those given evidence, because they all acknowledged the letter and did make attempts in their session at the short notice to address the points in it as best as they could. So,
yep, thank you. Any other comments on that? Yeah. So, do members have any other items of business that they wish to raise? Nope. Okay. I'm sorry to see all those young people coming in to witness the work of the committee, and unfortunately having to leave now when we're going into closed session. We're sorry about that. Yep. Okay. So I need to seek agreement then from the committee to state clear that we're moving now into closed session, and we agree that we do that. And just
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.